In the beginning, God created. We don't really deny that, but we don't think much about it either. We think God is in heaven, Mass is on Sunday, and then I get the rest of the week. But God created, and now and again we get a glimpse of that creation. Just last week I was in North Dakota for a couple of days, and we were duck hunting over a marsh, and we got out there and it was pitch black. All we could see is the stars overhead, and to the north we could see the Big Dipper with the handle pointing down. That gives you an idea of what time it was, and it was dark. You could see the stars overhead. And then a little bit of light began to come across the eastern sky. And then it got a little bit brighter, a little bit more, and it was going to be a windy day. There was a deck of high clouds, and as the sun rose, before it even got the horizon, it lit up all of these clouds from underneath, and all of the sky turned blazing fire red. And you look to that and you say, this was the beauty of God. God was revealing himself in this wonderful moment. He was showing off to the rest of the whole world the beauty that is there in creation. And God is more beautiful than the beautiful things he creates. He's the source of all beauty. He's more beautiful than all of creation. He's also wiser and smarter than all of creation. Every decade, science comes up with new understandings of biology. We find new insights into the cell, and each year we go plumb a level deeper than we had gone before. And we never plumb the bottom, but God is in the foundation of all of these mysteries. He knows all things. He created all things. And when we begin to see the beauty and the power and the majesty of God, we see something of all that he has done. We see his fingerprints. We see his handiwork. We see his plan upon all of creation. When you and I correspond to that plan, when we say yes to that plan, we're saying yes to the Creator. Very significant. Don't deny that. Don't set that aside. God's plan is revealed in creation. We see that in the scriptures today. We find that in the beginning, God created. He created all of the world. And then we find that he creates man, and man is in his own image and likeness. And Adam names all of the animals. That shows he's superior to them. He gives them their name. They're not his equals. None proved to be a suitable partner. And then finally, God took out a rib from his side and built it up into the woman. And she was to be the perfect helpmate. This one at last is bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh. This one shall be called woman, for out of her man this one has been taken. Pope John Paul describes this as the sacrament of creation, and he says marriage is at the very center of this sacrament of creation. He really calls it the primordial sacrament because God intended marriage. God planned for marriage. And marriage isn't just a sexual relationship. It's a committed relationship between the two, the husband and the wife, the man and the woman. It's not an accidental union. It's not an occasional union. It's not a hooking up union. It's a permanent union of man and woman as it was in the beginning. That's the intention of the Creator. And when we look into creation, we begin to see how God has worked these things. Now, you and I, as Christians, we call this the natural law. See, the church uses the book of creation as well as the book of sacred scriptures. And both of them speak to us because the same God who created is the same God who sent his Son into the world. He reveals himself supernaturally. He reveals himself naturally. And the church interprets both of these books to give us understanding of the right path. It gives us an open door to happiness. When we unite ourselves to God, when we follow after his will, good things happen to us. When we break away from God's plan, we find that bad things happen to us. You'll notice in creation, God made the male and female, and it reveals the complementarity of the bodies of husband and wife, complementarity of the psyches of husband and wife, even complementarity of the roles, much denied today. We want to suggest that, the roles are interchangeable, but they're not. Husbands and wives are different. In fact, they parent differently. We have to be careful of assuming there were interchangeable parts and either one can be had or missing and it's all fine. We actually need a mom and a dad to raise kids. All of this is part of the mystery of God's plan, and when we look deeper into the mystery, when we conform ourselves to the plan, good things happen to us. When we break away from the plan, bad things happen to us. Now you notice there's not only positive teachings about this, there's also proscriptions. Marriage is only between a man and a woman. That's by God's plan. That's the design. That's the way he made it. It's not just an accident, it's his intention for us. So watch out for notions that we can have any sort of coupling we want, and that it'll all be happy, it'll all be good. Not so. That's a modern anomaly, And already it shows signs that all kinds of bad things are coming from it. The only place for sex is in marriage, sealed by a promise because of the depth of the sharing and the possibility of new life. You see the whole world trying to hook up, trying to find alternatives to no permanence and no commitment. And you find that we get broken hearts, we get fatherless children, we get wounded people because we're misusing the gifts of God. We've stepped away from God's creative plan to try and do it our own way, and we make all kinds of disasters, all kinds of problems all around us. And again, there should be no divorce. What God has joined together, let no one divide. We find that God wants us to live as it was in the beginning. We know that after the original sin, it was going to be hard. Selfishness came into the world. All of us live with wounded humanity. But Jesus comes to us. The God-man enters our world. God penetrated our world with his own Son, entered our world to reveal the plan of the Father and to give us the grace. Each of the sacraments provides us grace, supernatural power to live as it was in the beginning. That's what Jesus says here. In the beginning, it was not that way. In the beginning, he made them male and female. In the beginning, he wanted them to be lifelong and permanent partners. That's the plan of God. And so we have to look at ourselves and see sometimes our tendency to want to break away is really rooted in selfishness. It's rooted in something that's simply not good for us. What God has joined together, man must not divide. Man's view is based on a changing world where comfort is number one. God's view is based on permanence, even if it means hardships. Man's view is based on self-seeking and pursuit of fulfillment, even if it means divorce. How often we hear, she failed to grow with me. He failed to mature. And we say, I'll be better off somewhere else. And we break away from our commitments. These are terrible things. And his view is based on self-sacrifice, even if it means suffering. This is a Christian view. This is not the world's view. Did you know that all of Western civilization is based upon monogamous marriage? Jesus brought permanent marriage into the world. That's probably one of the chief fruits of the church. And one man united to one woman with one stable family, raising kids so that each generation is better than the one before. That's what brought about Western civilization. In other words, marriage isn't just this little thing off to the side. It's the core. Stable marriage is the core. We need that. God's view calls for a lifelong fidelity. We have to have ourselves in a permanent commitment. He calls us to openness to new life. This is something which is really on shaky ground right now. The world's view is the opposite. The world divorces love from commitment by trial marriages, cohabitation, and we find ourselves in so many ways undermining permanence. The world divorces love from fidelity by pornography, prostitution, infidelity. The world divorces love from life by contraception. Boy, our world has really embraced that. It's a horrible mistake. It's the foundation. The idea that sexuality has no purpose, no meaning, and I can ascribe whatever meaning I want to it. That's led to the confusion we see around us today. So watch out for any breaking away from God's original plan. The goal is to live as it was in the beginning, not to make up our own plan and think it'll all be good. That's not the way God intended it. And again, we find ourselves living in a world that's full of challenges right now. And the goal is not simply to reestablish the world as it is, it's to actually go back to the beginning. Did you know that marriage has fallen on such hard times that in this archdiocese, in 1994, there were 4,500 marriages. Last year, there were 1,150. Can you imagine that? More than a 70% decline. And people who aren't marrying, they're finding themselves sometimes hooking up, sometimes simply casually living together. But in the end, they always break apart. And then they find themselves in 40 and 50 years old, 60 years old, single and lonely and broken, adored and glorified, who has spoken through the prophets. I believe in one holy Catholic and apostolic church. I confess one baptism for the forgiveness of sins.